This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and what you see in front of you is a Waters-Conley 78 RPM phonograph, probably from the 1940s. We haven't done anything to this yet. We just now plugged it in, and we're going to turn it on and see what happens. Where's that button? Right here. Wow, that sounds like it's in need of major help. Well, I've already done some reading on the internet as far as repairing these old record players and radios, and everything I'm reading tells me to replace all of the capacitors, whether they be paper, disc, mica, electrolytic, whatever, no matter how old it is. If it doesn't work, replace all the capacitors. If it's a 1920s Atwater Kent that doesn't work, replace all the capacitors. If it's a 1990 Daewoo TV that won't power on, replace all the capacitors, and that will cure all your problems. You don't need to invest none of this fancy test equipment that costs money and takes time to use. All you need is a soldering iron and some basic hand tools, and just replace the capacitors, and it'll work just fine. So with all of that said, we're going to open this up, and we're going to replace the capacitors. Well, I opened this up, and much to my surprise, there are no capacitors in here. And that tells me that somebody's already opened this up and robbed the capacitors out of it, because according to what I read on the internet, any kind of electric equipment with a power cord is supposed to have capacitors in it. So, and with the ones that somebody robbed out of here, that explains why it works so poorly. So I think what we'll do, we'll just take an educated guess as to what goes where, and we'll just add some capacitors, and that should get this thing in tip-top working shape. Okay, we've populated the record player with nice, fresh, new capacitors. This is our across-the-line AC capacitor. This here is our cathode bypass capacitor. This here is our tone capacitor that sets the proper tone for our output, and this here is our grid coupling capacitor for our audio output tube. So we'll now put the bottom cover back on. I'm so sure this is going to work. I'm going to just go ahead and screw the bottom cover back on, and we'll give it a shot. Okay, we're all back together with the record on, and I just know we're going to get fabulous results here. So let me push the magic button and see what happens. Well, it really sounds about the same as it did. Let's see if it'll play a record. Well, I just don't understand that at all. The internet said that if I replaced the capacitors that it would magically come back to life, and it's doing the exact same thing as it did before. I don't get that, because if it's on the internet, it should be true, right? Well, that's what I always thought. Okay, all joking aside, I hope you got a little humor out of that. And that was really not all meant to be humorous. There was some seriousness there. I'm on a lot of vintage electronics groups on Facebook and whatnot, and you'd be surprised how many people seem to think that replacing capacitors is the be-all, end-all. I've even seen people with late 80s, early 90s television sets that were asking, well, my TV won't power up, what should I do? And somebody would jump in and say, recap it, and it'll work fine. Well, I strongly disagree with that. There's no need in recapping a 1980s or 1990s TV. That kind of stuff is still new enough that you find what's wrong with it and you fix it. And yes, on older stuff, especially from the tube era, it is a good idea to replace the old paper and electrolytic capacitors. And even in some TVs, you'll find that even the early film capacitors will give trouble. But replacing all the capacitors is no guarantee that your equipment is going to work like new again. In fact, more times than not, I find that there's something else wrong with the equipment after replacing capacitors, and it still requires troubleshooting on my part. And like I've said in previous videos, I've known of people that were very good at replacing capacitors, and I've known of people that weren't so good at replacing them. They were rather sloppy with it, but then when the equipment didn't work, they were at a loss as to what to do, and the equipment either went on the shelf for the next 5 years, or they either finally gave it to me or threw it away, or in some cases they asked me to fix it for them. So, you know, if you're going to do this kind of stuff, you really need to have at least some basic troubleshooting knowledge. You know, you don't need a shop full of fancy lab-grade test equipment to get you started, but you at least need things like a digital multimeter. This will be your most used piece of test equipment. Without this, you know, you're pretty much screwed. And of course you need a soldering iron and basic tools like screwdrivers and nut drivers and wire cutters and such. Having a schematic diagram of your equipment will help a great deal. And having at least a basic knowledge of how your equipment works, how the circuits in your equipment work, will be a great deal. This is not something that you're going to learn overnight. I've been doing this for 30 plus years, and I'm still learning. In fact, when I run into somebody that's cocky and arrogant and thinks they know it all about this kind of stuff, I tend to avoid them because they're really too dangerous to be working on anything. When somebody acts like they know it all, they probably don't know diddly squat, to be honest. Usually whenever I overhaul a piece of equipment, whether it be a vintage television, and I'm talking about something from the vacuum tube or maybe early solid state era, or radio or record player, stereo or whatever, I don't like to just go in and just shotgun all the capacitors, because what if you do all of that and then you discover that some major fault is wrong with your television, for example. Say you've got a CRT that's totally dead, you've got a flyback that's toast, you've got a yoke that's bad, power transformer that's burned up. Any one of those things could keep your TV out of operation for a long time, and maybe permanently, and if you can't find the parts to fix it. I mean, I was just thinking about the little Panasonic TV that Shango was just working on. If something like a yoke or a flyback was bad in that set, you'd probably never find that part. And if you went to the trouble to recap it first, then you'd just be out a lot of labor and expense for capacitors, only to have a TV that's just sitting there that won't never work again because some part's bad that can't be found. So I like to actually troubleshoot the equipment that I'm working on and try to at least see what kind of condition the major parts are in. And like with a radio or whatever, if I determine that the power transformer and all of the vital organs are okay, then I'll proceed with the recap. But otherwise, I'm not gonna just take any chances. I've been down that road in my younger days of fixing stuff, do a nice neat job recapping things and find out something's majorly wrong that can't be fixed. So with that said, now let's fix this record player in the Okay, we carefully remove the spring-loaded clip that holds the platter on. I don't know why they couldn't have used just a simple E-clip, but whatever, we got it off. Then the platter still wants to be stubborn, so we're going to have to take our vice grips or hammer or whatever I can put my hands on the quickest and hit this spindle a few times, and then it should come off. We can tell this needs lubrication of the center bushing in the worst kind of way. Well, this is strange. No idler wheel. No wonder it sounded like a bumpy mess. This just looks like it just sits over the motor shaft. And it looks like somebody wrapped this up with tape, so I don't know how we're going to solve that problem. But we've got to come up with something. If not, we'll just take a more conventional 78 RPM drive mechanism out of a junk phonograph and put in here. Okay, in all my years of working on phonographs, I've never seen a drive mechanism like this. This was obviously cheap, bottom of the line. This is nothing more than a spring that just slides over the motor shaft, very loose fitting, and whatever driving surface was on here originally had obviously disintegrated, and someone replaced it with a wrapped old tape around it. Well, I just took some rubber O-rings that are tight-fitting and slid them over the shaft. And there you go. It's a lot quieter now, and the reason it's still rumbling is because I have not cleaned and lubricated the center bushing yet, so we'll now take it apart and pull that apart and clean it up and oil it. Take the motor out and clean it and oil it and put it back together, and with any luck, it'll run somewhere close to the right speed of 78 RPM. And since the capacitors didn't fix the problem, we'll just pull them out and put them back in my drawer for future use. Okay, we cleaned the spindle, and now we're cleaning the bushing here with some alcohol, and you can see all the old expired lubricant coming off on the Q-tip. We want to clean it until no more lubricant comes off. Here we are with the plier back on, no drive wheel yet, but that's much better. It's not clanking, it's not noisy, it's got good spin down time. That's what we want. Now it's time to pull the motor, and we'll just loosen these 3/4 inch nuts here. I'm not going to take them all the way out because I want to hold the motor from the bottom and hand loosen these, because there probably will be washers and spacers and whatnot, and I don't want to lose any of them. Okay, here's the motor, and there are some washers and spacers to deal with, and there's some spacers inside of those rubber grommets, but they're tight fitting, and surprisingly the rubber grommets seem to still be good, so we're going to leave them alone. It's funny, sometimes the 1940s rubber holds up better than the stuff from the 50s and later. Okay, here's the motor, and I cheated a little bit. This is one of those goofy ones with a clip that holds the cooling fan on. It's almost impossible to get off without stabbing your fingers. So since this motor was pretty well freed up anyway, I loosened it up the best I could, cleaned it the best I could, put some oil in it, put it all back together as much as I took it apart, and it's running like a top, so we're not going to worry about fully taking this motor apart and cleaning it out. Now, if it was totally frozen up and gunked up, then I'd fight with the clip and try to get it off, but it's not, so, and this is not something I'm going to be using all the time, so it's fine just like it is. Okay, we're back together and running and fairly quiet. Now, I don't know whether it's running at the right speed yet or not. That remains to be seen, but we are running. The only problem is I don't know if we're going to have enough torque to play a record with this heavy tone arm on it, because I don't have to put my finger on it very hard to stop it, so that might be a problem. I dug around, found an old needle and something. It's probably worn out, but I don't care. This is a test. And what do you want to bet it's going to bog it down?
On the magic wings of hauntings of a string, I wander into yesterday. I recall another night, and the words by candlelight.
Yeah, well, not as bad as I figured it would, but you can definitely tell some speed variation there, and all this needs to be taken apart and lubricated. This is so stuck up that it won't even move freely, and so we need to take all that apart and clean it and lubricate it up. Yeah, this has got some old hard, gummy, crusty, non-functional lubricant on it, and you want to be careful with these, because I'm pretty sure this is pot metal, and it will break relatively easy, so clean it gently, re-lubricate it and put it back together again. Don't use no force, because it will snap, and if it does, you might as well just throw the whole thing in the garbage. Get in here with a Q-tip and get all this old grease out of here. And just like with the spindle bushing, we'll keep doing this until we get all the crud out. That's pretty nasty. Okay, that's done, and this moves a lot more freely now, which is good. Okay, don't know how well this is going to work, but in an effort to give it a little more torque, I went the next size up on the O-rings and added some to the ones we'd already previously placed on there. So maybe we can get this to work and it'll have enough torque to turn at a more constant speed, not bog down. Okay, it's working, but the speed's all over the place. It seems like when you first put the needle on the record, it's running too fast, and then it bogs down. But I'm not too worried about it, because, like I've said, this is not something I'm going to use on a regular basis. It's just a novelty more than anything else. If I can find something more appropriate to put on that shaft, then that's what we'll do. But for now, I'm putting it back together and calling it a day. Might order some new needles, because I know this one's worn out, and these kind of needles are supposed to be changed after each record side anyway, and we know that one certainly hasn't. So, well, look what I found, my grommet assortment, and I've got some small ones in here. And these definitely have more traction to the touch than these rubber O-rings have. So I think we're going to take these off, try one of these if it'll fit, and see what happens. Okay, let's try it now with the B side. Might have done played too much of the A side. Might get a copyright strike. Well, it's obviously running a lot faster than 78 RPM. And now the darn thing's running too fast. I'm about to the point of not even messing with this stupid thing anymore. It was a low-end piece of junk back then, and it's a low-end piece of junk now. If I can find a decent 78 RPM drive with a real idler wheel on it, I'll use that. But this crap, I don't know whatever made anybody think this was reliable. This thing won't even stay solid on the motor shaft, and you can see it's not running straight, and it just sits on the motor shaft. And a couple of times already, this thing's flown off the motor shaft while I was trying to do something with it. I thought I could just put some heat shrink tubing over the shaft and heat it up and shove this spring over the shaft. No, that didn't work. The heat shrink tubing just bunched up and pushed down the shaft, so I don't know what to do with this. I don't even know why I bought it. It's not like I'm going to use the stupid thing. Well, I've done about all I can do to this tonight for now. I built up the spring with heat shrink tubing. I still have no way to mount this on the shaft permanently without it flying off. It'll play a record. It runs a tad too fast. You know what? I don't care. I can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And that's about what this amounts to. So, whenever I dig through my junk and doing some cleaning out, and I find an old raggedy old 78 player that has a traditional style drive mechanism with a real idler wheel on it, something that looks like this, then I'll transplant the mechanism out of it and put it in this thing. But I've done about all I can do with this. with this worn-out Jimmy Rogers record before the thing flies off of the motor shaft. I'm surprised it hadn't already flown off. This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and this is the symphonic record player that we fixed and painted, even listed it on eBay and got a bunch of bids on it. Well, then I get ready to pack the thing, and when I run my hand across it, I notice gray paint on my hands. Even after it's sat for over 24 hours, it's still not, for some reason, the paint's not sticking. As you can see there. So that's no good. I send this to somebody and they get paint all over themselves or get paint all over their furniture from residue coming off this, and it's going to be my butt in the sling. So we can't just send this out like this. I've had some people suggest to me what it might be, and frankly that's going to be a lot of extra work that I'm not willing to put into this. So the drive mechanism's coming out of this, and it's going in the Waters-Conley phonograph, and we won't even worry about this one. Okay, I did the drive transplant, but things are still not going well. It seems this old idler wheel is so slick that it's not providing a lot of torque for the turntable platter. Well, that wasn't any problem when we were using it with a tone arm that tracks it 8 grams, but when you got something like this, it tracks at 10 pounds, exerting pressure on the tone arm on the record, it just bogs the motor down. But we'll see if we can get it to play something here.
Flags and banners waving in the breeze. With excitement raving, fighting to get in. Lost his way the savage was but moving to the den. Don't think it is a circumstantiation such a gap.
Yes, those are steel needles that are supposed to be changed after each side of the record. I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I really don't want to spend $30 for an idler wheel rebuild on something that probably has a negative value anyway. So it's probably just going to get put up on the shelf and used as a display piece, unless I find a junker with a better wheel in it. You know, that's the problem with fixing these old phonographs. This is not the 1980s or 1990s anymore, when I could just run down to the parts house and get a cartridge for $5.95 and a idler wheel for about the same price. In today's world, you're looking at anywhere between $20 and $30 for a cartridge, and you're looking at a good $30 to $35 for an idler rebuild. Well, once you factor in shipping to send the old one off and all that. So that's why we have to charge what we charge for these things. You know, this is not the old days when somebody could give us an old phonograph, we could fix it for 10 and sell it for 20 and think we'd really done something. It's just not possible anymore. Alright, let's see what this one does. And you can hear it trying to bog down there. I will say, for an acoustic phonograph, the sound quality is not all that bad, but in order for this thing to be ready to use, it really needs a nice new idler wheel on it with some nice fresh rubber, not something that's slick as owl poop. Alright, here's the amp. I cut off the excess portion of the motor board. If somebody wants this, I'll put it on eBay in case anybody wants it. I don't expect to get much out of it. Basically just a little something to cover these parts, and in here will be fine. I also save the tone arm because I've got a record player that'll fit nicely on. It's one of those old 78 jobs from the 40s. It has a metal tone arm that tracks at 200 pounds. We can put this on there and it'll track much lighter, and I doubt anybody will know the difference. So, now keep in mind, unless you build some kind of preamp stage for this amplifier, you're going to need a pretty stout signal to drive it, somewhere on the order of 2 to 3 volts. And also keep in mind about dangers of hot chassis and such. If you're going to try to convert something like this for guitar use, or for that matter, anything that you're going to plug any kind of line-operated equipment to, you need to install an isolation transformer on it. And where the tone arm was, you can put a 1/4-inch jack there for your audio input. Well, listen to me telling you what to do. You do whatever you want to with it. I'll list it on eBay, and if you want it, that's great. And if you don't, then these parts will be something I can use for the next project that's more worthwhile. Okay, here's the Talk Phone 78 RPM record player with the ultra-heavy metal tone arm on it. There's really no way to put any kind of counterbalance spring on this. I could drill a hole in the back of the tone arm and put a huge counterweight on it, but that would look tacky. And even with the old heavy crystal cartridge gone, that I don't even remember if I still have or not, it may be up inside the record player, it's still way too heavy for any modern type of cartridge. So I just plan on swapping the whole arm out for this one that came off with a symphonic record player. It's period correct, and most people wouldn't even know the difference. Alright, here it is opened up, and as you can see, this has a nicer amplifier in it than what we just scrapped out. This actually has a 2-stage amp, so we can put a 1-volt cartridge in this one, and it'll have plenty of audio output. Okay, here we are with the other tone arm, and this must be my day for drive problems. I can't remember whether I ever serviced the drive mechanism on this or not, but this is running way too slow.
Where is your heart?
And as you can tell, not a lot of torque on this one either.
Some love thief must have stolen it.
Now, when one of these is in proper order, it should take a lot more than that to make it stop. I ought to be able to pretty firmly press my finger on here to get it to stop. But this thing definitely gets loud. And of course, all this tone control is just a treble cut, which is what they are on most of these types of record players. Well, I believe I have cleaned and lubricated this. This is all too cleaned up in here, but just like on the Waters-Conley, this old wheel is dry and slick and cracked, and it's just not making it just doesn't have the grip that it should have. So add 2 idler wheels to the list of ones that need to be rebuilt.
That somewhere you'll see her again and again.
Yeah, the speed's better now, but still, this is not something I would release to somebody until we get the wheel replaced. You know, I'm not like some people that just does enough to one of these to get it out the door and get your money. I like to, and of course I'm not saying I'm going to sell this. This may be one that I keep, but if I were to sell it, I'd want it to be reliable. I don't want it to be patched up just enough to get it out the door.
Special dreams bloom on the hillside and shine in the stream. If you
Okay, I've about had all I can stand for this workshop for one day, so I'm fixing to call it a day, and when I get ready to have these wheels rebuilt, then we'll get it done. But right now, that's it.
It happened at the Festival of Roses. If love is true, true love